IVM.
What the internet has done has made sure that there are no more gatekeepers. We're all broadcasters, we're all media makers, we're all putting, content out there. So therefore, now knowing how the distribution cycles work on the internet, what it takes to get discovered, what it takes to get attention, and therefore what are the opportunities that lie to monetize that attention for artists is really what will hold true no matter what we look at.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee Podcast. My guest today is Gunjan Arya, who is the Chief Executive Officer of OML, or Only Much Louder. This is a conversation that I've been wanting to have for many months now, and finally I'm very happy that we managed to match calendars. The reason is I don't know of many other companies which have had the kind of impact on popular and subcultures in India the way OML has, especially in the last decade. And Gunjan has been a big part of this journey, not just as a formal part of OML, but as someone who's worked with OML right from the early days. Welcome to the Filter Coffee Podcast, Gunjan. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm quite excited about this.
How's the lockdown been treating you?
Honestly, as good as it could possibly be under these circumstances. Very grateful that at least in the immediate family, there's been no real major health scares. But I think it's about time the way the numbers are going. We're all going to know someone personally. And obviously, it's an experience you've been through yourself. So, we'll see, right? We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Hey, we were speaking some time back, and you were actually telling me about how you guys were actually practicing working from home, not for this purpose, but for something else, and it came in really handy. Tell us that story.
Sure. So starting Jan, one of our New Year resolutions was to see how is it that we can almost give ourselves more headspace. In a city like Mumbai, you spend an average of 2 hours every day traveling back and forth from work. And it really eats into not just time, but the energy that you have to do things, both at work and at home. And honestly, we're nothing if we don't have that headspace to come up with new ideas. As OML and businesses in our space, our people and all of us are the hardware and the software engineers themselves, like we literally need to show up and be at our optimal best if the business has to do anything, which is why we actually made a concentrated effort to give people as much time to themselves and for themselves as possible. And starting Jan, we started something called Work From Home Wednesdays, where as a practice, we wanted to try to ensure that teams don't have to come into work for at least one day of the week. And honestly, it was only going to be successful if the entire company didn't come that day. Otherwise, it's very easy to say, hey, I'm coming, are you coming as well? And it's easy for, large group meetings, etc., to start getting called on those days. So which is why we just did this thing where it was every Wednesday, no one needs to come in unless and until there's a shoot or an active project. And we felt that it was something that maybe we could do for the city as well. That like if we're putting 150 less cars on the roads of Mumbai, then we've done something for at least one day of the week for the city. So that's where it came from. And that practice has been super, super helpful now. Because we've all sort of figured out our mojo. We went into work from home, I think, a week before the national lockdown was announced. So March 13th, and, coming up on 4 months of the lockdown, none of us, apart from, of course, that social interaction, seeing each other, all of that, we're not really missing that. I think we're working at our efficient best right now. Of course, it takes longer to schedule meetings. You can't just walk up to somebody's desk and say, hey, what's going on? And that requires you to send somebody a meeting request to say, hey, I need 5 minutes. I need to see your face. But outside of that, I think, of course, when we look back at this time, we're all going to say this was that one defining moment that really changed the way we all work, live, and build communities also.
Yeah. No, I'm just visualizing this from your perspective. And I've been to your office. I love that office. I love
we love it and miss it so much.
and the energy in that place is extremely difficult to replicate, I would assume. But if you can do it, I think that's a great inspiration for a lot of us to do it.
Thank you.
I really, understand the part about the entire organization going off, because I've been speaking about this to many heads of companies, small and big. And a lot of people have great intentions. Sometimes they try something like not being on the phone one day, not being on having any meetings on one day, etc. But landing it is very difficult unless everyone is actually not doing this, including your clients. Then it's not going to work. Right.
We've had really supportive clients. In fact, there's some that we've had long-term relationships with, like, for example, Bacardi. And we actually sent them an email saying, hey, Wednesdays is work from home Wednesdays, if you don't mind. And then we went into lockdown and said, hey, guys, now Wednesdays is no calls Wednesdays.
Oh, wow.
Because we also want that one day of the week where we're not spending the whole day on Zoom calls or, Google Hangouts or, Microsoft Teams meetings. But yeah, so now Wednesdays has become work from home Wednesday, has become no calls Wednesday.
No. And is that helping everyone?
Absolutely. I think what it does is also forces everyone to become a lot more disciplined. There are always going to be parts of the way we behave, the way we work, that can be made more efficient, where we're more mindful of each other's time. And especially in our industry where you can only do as much as the time you have, it becomes really essential to learn how to prioritize, become more disciplined. So for example, most meetings now, we try to set them up only for half an hour, because you don't really need that hour. I know the default setting is to send a meeting out for an hour. So last year, I actually changed that in my setting to say, okay, we're not going to schedule meetings for an hour anymore. It's going to be 15 minutes. So it always reduces like 5 or 10 minutes depending on what the schedule is. So if you're sending out a meeting for half an hour, it'll actually just schedule 25 minutes to give you the remaining 5. And now that we've gone into lockdown, we've actually asked all our business heads to do just half an hour meetings and don't elongate it if not needed. So stuff like that, stuff like making sure that you send out an agenda before the meeting, stuff like if there is a pre-read, send that out. So if you're discussing a deck, you don't need to watch somebody else going through the work that you did. They can form their opinions and their, responses to, the stimuli material, and you can just email it back to them. So like that classic saying of, hey, did this need to be a Zoom call or could it have just been an email? We're trying to do as much of that as we can.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love the simplicity of how you're doing this. And in fact, that's what people are most challenged with, right? Anyway, like I mentioned in the introduction, Gunjan, getting into the real conversation that I wanted to have, and I've been meaning to have this for the longest time, right? It's just that since the year began, it's just been a different kind of a trip.
Yes, 2020 is a washout, and how I feel like it's the gap year that we could have all taken when we were in college.
Yeah.
And we should just acknowledge that hey, this is, what I think a guest on one of your earlier podcasts called it a circuit breaker, and I love that phrase. But the one that I've been going with is that it's a gap year. It's going to be a gap year for our businesses. It's going to be a gap year in our lives. It's what you do with it that is really going to count when you come out on the other side.
Well, yeah, it is a gap year, and I think it's also sort of a before-after sort of a line, right? I'm trying desperately hard to not use the phrase that I hate the most these days, which is the new normal.
Oh, I hate you. Yeah.
So I'm going to call it before,
after. Before COVID and after COVID.
Yeah.
Easy.
But, one of the main reasons, and to be honest with you, I'm not saying this because you're the guest in the show, or Vijay is a dear friend. But I think OML is one of my most favorite companies, not just to work with, but the favorite company that I know of. Right? In the last 10 years. I just love, the way you think and the kind of people that make up OML. And there is a certain energy which is very difficult to recreate like that, right? And more than anything else, I think if you look at the last decade or probably even more, I think definitely one of the entities that has shaped popular culture in this country, right? Especially.
Wow, thank you. Yeah. It's been our dream to be part of culture, and I wouldn't go so far to say we shaped it, but honestly, that's been the space and that's been the playground.
Yeah, no, I have my mind, and if you just look at some of the bigger pieces that people normally associate with you, which is the NH7 Weekender or the entire culture of comedy, the way we know it now, which is very different from the way we knew it, say, in 2009 or 2010, etc., right? And also content, the way we know now, right? Many parts of it. So definitely no doubt in my mind. But I wanted to go a little behind and sort of explore this journey pretty much, from when it started for you. And I think, is it right to say that the Duerists was your first sort of a window into OML?
So actually a little before Duerists. It started with NH7 Weekender, which you spoke about as well.
Right.
So this was, I think, the first year, and the folks at OML were heading to Pune to check out the venue. And I'd been friends with them since long before that. And they said, hey, do you want to come? We're planning to organize a small party. That's what they referred to the NH7 Weekender as. We went and saw the venue. And this is so classic. It's almost embarrassing to repeat this. But we actually showed up at the venue without a measuring tape.
Wow.
We put 1 foot after the other and actually measured the size of the ground. Went to this cafe called Prame's, I'm pretty sure it's still around, and drew out the venue on a napkin, a paper napkin, and then looked around the table saying, hey, does this look about right? We're like, yeah, must be right. Of course it wasn't. It was terribly planned. We had a road going through the middle of the festival venue. And we had, and the cops were so supportive. They were helping fans cross over from one part of the venue to the other because the Aristov stage was on the other side and your two stages on the other side of the road. So, we've had some really, really fun experiences together. So we worked on...
But let me sorry to interrupt there.
No, go ahead.
But tell me about a little bit of... we all know what it has become. Right, but what were you trying to create back then?
So we had. So the dream was always to create this multi-genre music festival, something for everyone, and it really came from the space that, hey, here is this underserved community, there, and it exists, and the niche is large enough, which is true for I think almost every niche, at least in our country. And here is an opportunity to actually use this as a way for not just brands that are looking to become synonymous with this culture as it grows, but also to support the artists and support the space. And that's really always been, at least our endeavor as OML. It's always to say, hey, what are the subcultures that we know we can, throw spotlight on, find a way to create space on stages? How is it that you... build out the audience attention? It might be preliminary at the beginning, but then, no journey makes sense in the beginning, right? It will always make sense at the end. Like, oh, glad we tried that because here we are today. And that's true for most journeys in the culture space, at least. So yeah, that's always been our endeavor. And personally, I've always sort of been interested in that aspect of culture. So you'll always have culture. Culture plays in two ways. There's the culture that sort of trickles top down, which is us trying to emulate, say, our past rulers, which is why our love for tea in this country, or then the way, what you may have seen of what the big fat Indian wedding has become, which is all of us trying to behave like the Maharajas and Maharanis of past, And you can obviously pick out which aspects of the big fat Indian wedding come from our religious requirements and the ones that come from our cultural sort of affiliations with our past, where we're just we're always trying to emulate those that embody power, right? So that's one aspect of culture. And then the other aspect of culture is the subcultures, which are using their creative options to speak truth to their experiences, which is why subcultures like independent music or or hip hop, which is obviously symbolic of this, or then comedy. And that's really been our work at OML, which is to find these subcultures, see what we can do with them, do our best to support and grow that space.
I interrupted you when you were taking measurements and working with the cops in your first year of NH7. And I know a lot of people who were part of that first year show. And for everyone, it was is an experience that they'll never forget, right? And it's even for the people, the audience, I think the first one was one of their favorite years as well. Talk to us a little bit more about how it actually happened, those months prepping for it, and what are the acts that you had? What were the surprises that you encountered in this journey?
I think we actually checked off that entire list of everything that could possibly go wrong. So we ran out of money. We had to go back to our faithful sponsors at Bacardi to say, hey guys, can you help? We almost had a natural disaster with rains, etc. during those months, which never happened otherwise. But of course, there was, the forecast for that. Then I was telling you about how badly we planned our venue. I was actually working with OML then in my capacity as a designer of information. It was a brand consulting and communication firm that I started back then, and I was working on the branding and comms for Weekender.
Right.
So we were doing everything that we could do to make sure that we had more people attend the festival, because it was the first year. We actually had people go out to colleges, give out flyers on the day of the festival. We're standing there. So this is all of us pulling out all stops saying, we're going to make sure this happens and this gets taken off the ground. Wow. So yeah, that was the first time. But as design of information, then we worked with OML a lot on things that were, we were either on the consulting side or the communication side, and they were on the production side. And you mentioned the Duarist. The Duarist was another example of some of the projects that we've collaborated on.
And I want to talk about that in more detail, right? And not just because it's one of my most favorite pieces of content from that decade, and a lot of my.
I think, thank you.
No, I'm being truthful. A lot of my my playlists are filled with songs from the Duarist, right? But more than anything else, even as of last week, when I speak to clients and whenever we think of a concept for a reality show where musicians collaborate, and they're like, you know what, you remember Duarist like that? Let's do something like that. So it's been like that, right? I don't remember, that sort of a format before. Definitely not something that succeeded in India before. How did you conceive something like that? And for a brand who, thanks to that show, people can pronounce the name correctly now.
Honestly, that was the communication challenge that we were given to solve. Like, hey, if you come out of this where people don't call it Diwar anymore and think about Amitabh Bachchan, then we're fine.
But how did the concept of that show come about, and what was your experience putting that together?
So it was a bit of a greenfield space. No one had really done anything like that, at least in India. And a lot of the concept really came from OML back then, which was working with these independent musicians already. The idea was to find, and similar with NH7 Weekender, right? Like, hey, can we find a larger audience, a wider audience for this kind of music and this kind of distribution? And hey, is there a necessary overlap with this audience's interests with the brand's target audience? And that was really the genesis of, yes, we're in the right direction. If we can say that this kind of content will find attention within the audience that the brand is trying to reach out to, which is, hey, more discerning, more nuanced in their approach to the kind of whiskey that they select. They are more selective in the kind of music they listen to. They obviously are in, and, marketing parlance, this brand operated in the needs space of appreciation. So if we can overlay that on the story arc of the show itself, of, the beginning, middle, and end of every story? Do we, at the end of each episode, give them the music video that, hey, they wouldn't have access to otherwise? Made sense 9 years ago. Today, of course, with the way the internet works and the way social media has sort of taken over all our video consumption habits, we're sort of used to getting to the prize immediately. Nobody is releasing a trailer a few weeks before and then saying, hey, go watch this film. People are just dropping the film or the final sketch or the final product and saying, hey, go watch this. Because if you've taken all that time and effort to get your audience to navigate to the final product, if you've done the hard work of getting someone's attention today on social media, you might as well just give them the prize. So that's obviously our sort of construct on audience viewing habits back then was, hey, if you sort of leave it for the end, people will sit with you through the journey. And that was, the travelogue aspect of The Tourist, which is, two musicians traveling to a third location, collaborating, spending 3 or 4 days together, and then coming up with this masterpiece. And we were really lucky to have the support of all the musicians and the entire community that really came together to make it happen. And it was, and I mentioned a bit of how it was complete greenfield thinking. I think that was the first year that Cannes instituted the category of branded content that year itself.
Is that right?
Yes,
okay.
And we won. And it was a complete unexpected sort of ending to that. But yeah.
Unexpected for you, bro. Not surprising for the rest of us.
Yeah, because honestly, at all points of time, we would just say, what are we doing? And this is what I said earlier, right? Like, none of these journeys make sense in the beginning. They make sense at the end.
Right. What really struck me about Tourists is, it's not getting some of the best musicians in the country and put them in a resort, in a beautiful house, and expecting magic to happen is one thing. But for the magic to actually happen, is a completely different thing, right? That must have taken some getting used to, even for those musicians, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You know the Indian music circle a lot more than I do, but we don't really have a whole lot of collaborations. We certainly didn't have up until that point, right? Even in the concert that we used to go to, a parikrama gig is a parikrama gig, right? Tamil and a quarter is a Tamil and a quarter.
Right.
The collaboration really didn't exist much. What were some of the interesting anecdotes bringing these people together?
I think, okay, so I'm now going to rat out the musicians that, gave us the more interesting times. But I think the one that we had an opportunity to shoot with, say, Ankur and Prateek Kuhad during Weekender in Shillong, I thought that was just such a beautiful time, because you knew that the musicians were traveling, plus working on the music, plus performing at the festival, plus, all of that at the same time. Or then the one that we did in Kashmir with Shantanu Moitra and Papon was just absolutely stunning. But I think the all-time favorite remains the one with Vishal Dadlani. I think that one was just absolutely stunning. Yeah. From going from, Frou Frou being one of my favorite songs to then, seeing that entirely come alive on screen was absolutely stunning.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, my personal favorite. And I can't now decide after all these years whether it was a song or the episode or just the setting. I think this is the one with Shilpa Rao, I think Parikrama and Agni.
Yeah. Yes. Oh man, Mohan's voice is just like, I can still hear it.
Yeah. And everything about that song, right? Yeah. And of course, Sherpa, who's not there anymore. That was beautiful, and that somehow I've realized now. Actually, just a few months back, I realized that that song just makes it to multiple playlists of mine, right, in completely different genres.
I'm going to follow up with you on getting some of these playlists. You've already done the hard work, I might.
Only if I can access yours. So, but talking of which, whether it is NH7, in your own journey, right, and much of it has been with OML, but in your own journey, and with Tourists, and much more that you've done post that, right? I think we all know the audience impact of this, right? But what about the supply side, or what about the artists, right? What are some of the ways in which this has impacted them, either professionally or personally, or even creatively?
I think there's a lot more confidence in being able to take up a creative career now. And we see that with, the upcoming musicians, the upcoming comedians that we work with, writers, directors, etc. I think that would be the one big change. So about 7 years ago, we started a festival called The Coalition, which was a push in this direction to say that, hey, creative careers can be sustainable. There is an opportunity out there. If you have a unique voice, your own dedicated audience will find you. And we're obviously seeing that more and more with the creator economy sort of taking over all pockets of small and large businesses, or becoming one of the most viable media for even large brands to approach audiences. But I think that would be my single biggest sort of personal, the one thing that I'm very satisfied about is to see that, younger generations are looking at creative futures in a more meaningful way. And they're not seeing it as something that they can do on the side.
Yeah, no, and I can see, now that you mention it, I can see it sort of coming through in the kind of property that you create as well, right? Be it the Coalition or Comicstaan.
Absolutely.
Or NH7 still.
Absolutely.
And all of that. That's beautiful.
Right. And even with Weekender, the whole, I remember this one year where, of course, the purists, like yourself, who attended Weekender in first year, and then the third year, I think we had a Bollywood musician on stage, and very left of center Bollywood musician. This is Amit Trivedi. And we got hate for that because, of course, the purists will say, hey, Weekender isn't what it used to be like in year one. And now, of course, you'll have people say, hey, it isn't what it used to be like in year three. But the whole idea was to grow interest and find new audiences, because we were confident that those that come out for Amit Trivedi will start sampling music. How do you get discovered as talent, right? The whole idea of Weekender was to say, hey, can we pool together the different audiences that listen to all these musicians together and grow discovery and grow opportunities for being heard by this new collective base. And you mentioned that earlier about collaborations as well. That is the reason collaborations are so interesting to both the artists as well as to brands that then get to ride that, sum of collective audiences that will then tune in. This is the way musicians have gotten discovered time and time again. This is how a new record breaks. This is how Ritvik got discovered on the AIB handle. Yeah. Art always paves the way for new art to get discovered. And I think we've seen that through and through, whether it was creating multi-stages or multi-genre stages at Weekender, to then Comicstaan, which is, hey, let's have well-seasoned, well-respected comedians sort of throwing the spotlight to upcoming comedians, or then, for example, the Coalition, where we're actually trying to now impart real-world skills and talents, etc., or then even the Doers, which is collaborations again, right?
Right.
Give an opportunity to others to get discovered. So that's been the space, and I think that's the only way this will grow.
Fantastic. I think it's a great place for us to also take a very quick break. When we come back, I want to speak with you about the big part of OML that we haven't touched, which is comedy, and also speak to you about life, post 2020. Right? Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Coffee Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you haven't been following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Their support is much appreciated. Before I tell you about some of the shows that we have for you this week, I really wanted to kind of really point out the incredible efforts of our host and our team. We've been able to maintain most of our production schedule in this lockdown, which is going into 4 months now. And I couldn't be happier with the fact that our hosts and team have been able to kind of just get all of this stuff out so incredibly well. So I just really, really wanted to kind of call them out for that and thank them for their support in this time. And since I spent so much time talking about that, and I want to get you out of here quickly, let me give you a quick update on a few shows that you should check out this week. On Siders, we had Amish Tripathi, really, really interesting discussion, both of them dive deep into history. Monty Panesar was on Edges and Sledges, another really cool show. On Advertising is Dead, Tanmay Bhatt showed up. That was a cool episode. Malini Agarwal, also probably better known as Miss Malini, showed up on Absolutely Right. It's just been an absolutely gangbusters week in terms of like the kind of guests we've had and the conversations we've had on the network. Please do check some stuff out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back to the Filter Coffee podcast. We're speaking with Gunjan Arya, who's the CEO of Only Much Louder. Gunjan, before the break, we were speaking a lot about NH7 and music and subcultures, etc. I don't think there's been a bigger impact in subculture than comedy in the last 7-8 years. And I think OML has probably had a huge hand to play in that, right? Again, my question is very similar. When you started this journey, and we all knew someone like AIB, and AIB is not, the only kind of comedy that you work with or the only team that you work with. But if you take that as an example, we've all heard them as a podcast and all of that, right? And we all know what it has become now. But when you started this journey as an individual, as an organization, again, what were you wanting this to become? What was the initial vision like for you?
Honestly, there wasn't an initial vision. I think when the idea of working with AIB got introduced to us, some of us were actually very skeptical about this. We just weren't sure if this made any sense at all, both from, a perspective of getting into trouble as well as whether it made business sense.
Right.
And that was our first reaction, honest to God reaction. But of course, we saw that, the first show that we helped them with, it was a live show. It sold out. It did well. And we're like, oh, wow, there is an audience for this stuff. And maybe it's worth looking into more. And it was from there that our journey in the comedy space actually started, where we realized there were audiences, there were ticket-paying audiences. Back then, of course, most of the monetization happened through ticket sales to end customers and not content. But with AIB, in fact, we started looking at branded placements in content on YouTube as well. So that started. But yeah, it's been quite a ride since. And I think it's also sort of almost paralleled the way the creator economy has been growing globally. And we just sort of got lucky to be in the right place at the right time. We honestly got in on the ground floor, and since then it's just sort of been growing more and more.
Right. And I often think about this, right? The way comedy sort of became big in other parts of the world is very, very different, at least in my mind, from how it has panned out in India, right? If we go back, I think the place where I really, really discovered Comedy Central was on podcasts. And then of course on television, and then of course the piece on comedy stores, the live acts, comedy clubs across that sort of existed many years before, and in the US actually there were a lot of places where this can come to life, right? Like one of course is the late night shows, and then the SNL part of it. Writing became very important, and then writing for comedy became a legit profession, right?
Yes.
People were trained to do that, and all of that sort of happened, right? But in India, it almost seems like we got here in a hurry, right? We didn't do any of the base level stuff. We didn't have the culture.
For most Indian industries, though,
that's true.
That's literally how our growth has been since I think our economy opened up in 91. We just hurried through everything.
Correct. Yeah. But especially in comedy, right? This is not as easy, like manufacturing steel or something. I'm not saying that is easy, but at least there is a set path to it, right? So in a place where we didn't have comedy clubs came much later. In fact, the first comedy club in Chennai, Soko, was opened by Evam like last year. We didn't have a comedy club in Chennai until now. How was this journey? You spoke about, what you wanted to create and how much you had visibility to and how much you did not have visibility into. But once you gotten into it, there was you must have felt the need to build this out as a culture, not just as an act, right? And what was that journey like? Talk to us about some things that didn't work and worked.
So I'll tell you some of the experiences that we had from like the on-ground space was actually quite revelationary for us, or revelatory. What is the word, Karthik? Sorry.
It was a revelation. Yes.
It was a revelation. Fine. Okay. So I think that the fact that just the first show that sold out and we're like, hey, okay, this works. And then the second aspect, which was, guess what? Content marketing works, because that's what it was, right? It was saying, hey, I'm going to put my music or comedy out there for free. And that was actually our recommendation to every band that we managed back then as well. The idea was always to say, hey, the internet is free. Put your music out for free and people will pay for tickets to come out and watch you live. That stood for comedy as well. I think that was the first one. Then the second one was how we were able to work with brands. I remember the first brand that we worked with was Snapdeal for branded placement in content on the AIB channel. And I remember going to them with a proposal that said, okay, today you pay 2 rupees per view for being placed on a YouTube video. So we're going to charge you that much as well. And they obviously didn't understand why or what the merits of that was.
Right.
Because they're like, hey, if we place an ad roll, like before a YouTube video starts, you already see the ad before you see the content. So I'm sure of getting visibility, I'm sure of getting reach, I'm sure of getting all of these things. And we said, no, but at the same price, now people are going to be able to understand what the product is, what the service is. And we guarantee you, just the way people have to sit through that 30-second ad spot, more people are actually going to stay through till the end. So we went to them with this entire, obviously a little bit of prophecy and a little bit of crystal ball gazing as well. But they actually took the bite and they were absolutely amazed at the results because it got a lot of press, it got a lot of PR, it got a lot of, and that's the beauty of content that travels on its own, right? It has legs of its own and it builds interest over time. And that was, I think, our first experience with branded content on a YouTube channel. And that was a ton of fun. And I don't think there's been any turning back since then. So that was the second big revelation. And I think the third was that there is just so much more out there still to do. I think what you said earlier, which was your introduction to comedy, came through podcasts, etc., because I'm guessing you also had access to international media. You were already following these things online.
No, only because I was living in the US at that point. And,
you were. There you go. So
yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I think
it was much more difficult in India.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And comedy happened in India at the same time as the internet happened to India. And I think that sort of defines our journey more than anything else. So obviously in the US, it grew in a TV era. So the fact that you would get your special, which was, either half an hour or an hour, became a standard because your special was commissioned by a TV channel, and that's how TV channels are programmed. There is no one saying that a special needs to be that long anymore. You could do a 15-minute special and put that up on Netflix, which we just did with 4 of our women comics, or you could do, a 20-minute special and upload it on YouTube, which a bunch of other comics are doing. So that's absolutely okay. I think each of these genres will get redefined by the distribution mechanics that exist around it. So whether are you doing something for TV, then you're going to be restricted by those. If you're doing something for the internet, you will find, and the internet sort of behaves in this way where you're almost trying to look for that audience of one, right? Versus TV, where you're looking for massive audiences that then tune into that one channel. For the internet, it's actually about, hey, how do I show up on that one person's timeline? And then how do I repeat success X number of times more?
Right.
So the way content programming works for the internet generation is going to be what defines how each of these genres work.
Yeah,
and that's
it's an interesting point on how this is parallel to how internet itself traveled in India, right?
Yeah.
If I look at one common thread to most of the things you have done, it is also making subcultures commercially viable, right? I think that is somewhere probably I would even say that the biggest impact of what you've done. I know. You spoke about, how eventually it was about artists not worrying about taking this up as a career. But it's not just that. Right? You took it to a different level. Right? Took it to a different level in the sense, I'm trying to say this in the politically correctest way, which is you can become rich as a comic today, right? You can even pursue that as a fame and money sort of pursuit, right? Which is not really where it was, right? If you really think about it, for a Prateek Kuhad to have succeeded in the previous decade would have been very, very difficult, right? And for someone, who came out of Comicstaan to actually get that stage and now do that as a career and actually get paid for it would have been a very, very difficult thing to do. And of course, there are a lot of other aspects to it. YouTube was a big part of this, sure. And how brands sort of started looking at this as a vehicle for communication, played a big role in this, etc. Right? But what are some of the blueprints for you? Like tomorrow, when you pick up something else as a subculture and go with, say for example, you pick up esports as a subculture and go with it, right? What is the blueprint for you? What are the things that need to fall into place before you sort of make it commercially viable?
So I thank you. That was a very kind comment that we sort of made it larger than just making each career sort of economically viable. But there's a lot more that goes into that. There is that entire ecosystem. And for us, I think it's important to grow that ecosystem as opposed to just sort of us growing our share of the pie. And that's really how it's always been. It's very similar to early days Silicon Valley where, Yahoo would crack a deal and then call Google and say, hey, guess what? I just got this much money for this service. So maybe you can now go out to these people's competitions and go out and get more money as well. And that's how early days Silicon Valley sort of grew into what it is today. And that's always going to be the way for whether it's arts or business, any new business really, because you want to make the entire industry viable. You want to make the entire ecosystem, sustainable for everyone who has a part to play in it. I don't believe there is necessarily a certain blueprint that works across all genres or across all spaces. But I think the one biggest important thing that at least I've learned from, my time in advertising to branding and then now culture marketing in quotes, if that's what I can call it. But I think the one common thread is to be very, very close to where the audience is and to understand how distribution works. So I think what you were saying earlier about, sort of moving from TV to podcast to then discovering comedy in a comedy club, it all depends on who the gatekeepers are. So obviously arts flourished in the past where, you had the Darbar system of sort of patronage for the arts, right? And what came out of the arts or what was the cultural stories that they told were from that lens. What the internet has done has made sure that there are no more gatekeepers, right? We're all broadcasters, we're all media makers, we're all putting, content out there. So therefore, now knowing how the distribution cycles work on the internet, what it takes to get discovered, what it takes to get attention, and therefore, what are the opportunities that lie to monetize that attention for artists is really what will hold true no matter what we look at. So whether it is esports, whether it is comedy, whether it is music, it's always interesting to know how is it that one is getting discovered, how is it that audiences are getting built, and how is it that, you can almost shorten that funnel in marketing parlance to say, hey, how is it that I now monetize? What are the things that people are willing to pay for? And that's what I think makes our journey so close to. So whether it's an artist or whether it's a brand or whether it's a platform, everyone at the end of the day is trying to break that attention cycle, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think that's where really we would look at the confluence of those three to say, where is it that it makes sense for all three partners, necessary partners in this culture space, and then try to operate from there.
Beautifully put, right? Hey, so we sort of coming towards the close of this discussion, right? And I think the question that everyone is asking you, I'm sure, asking us, is what lies ahead, especially for this industry overall, and especially from a live event perspective and everything else, right? We all have our vantage points, but from where you are, how's the next couple of years looking? Not just for you, but for the industry at large.
Right. after the gap year. I think it will be really interesting to see what we do at this time to be able to make the most of what comes next. Honestly, it could swing in two directions, right? One is obviously people talking about this, hey, we're coming up on a second wave or a second pandemic. That's one side. People will get a lot more cautious. People will, and that will begin to feed into the kind of work that brands want to do. I think a lot of them are going to end up wanting to see immediate results or immediate conversions. And that's going to be one side of how that plays out, right? So whether it's the work that we do with them through events or the work that we do with platforms through content, a lot of that is going to be, hey, immediate results, immediate, a shorter term focus just to keep the engine running. And I think that is good. That could be one way this plays out. The other way that it plays out could honestly just be a massive revival. Because if you look back to the last pandemic, the outcome of that was, or the response to that and the prohibition era was the Great Gatsby moment, right? Where everybody was out, everyone was partying, everyone was... And I can almost see that happening because with all of us being locked away for like 4 months and now more, we are starved for human attention. We are starved for making those connections. And we're missing our communities. We're missing work. We're missing seeing each other. We're missing hanging out with each other. And whether in the beginning that starts coming at a premium and then going forward starts becoming more of a mass moment available for everyone to partake in and enjoy, that could be the other side. So, and which is obviously the side I'm batting for.
No, this theory that I've been trying to evolve in my head, it's not in a final shape yet, but what you said sort of makes me think about it, which is, see, there's definitely, for the better or worse, there's been an institutionalized fear, right? With heads of state coming and talking about how difficult it is getting for everyone. There is that. And what this has done is, and I was talking about this to someone recently, which is, it's put mortality in the top 10 things on your mind, right? It's breaking through the charts for the first time ever. Right? We didn't subconsciously think about this so much, right? And I feel that'll have an impact in how we spend both money and time, right? I think there's going to be a lot of carpe diem sort of thing going on, whether it is about getting drunk in a pub or pursuing a dream that you always wanted to and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So, and I can definitely see signs of that. There was this other theory that when this ends, a lot of people will reevaluate their career.
And where they live.
Where they live, for sure. And I think definitely balconies are going to be on the on the rise. All of those things, right? So from that perspective, I completely understand what you're saying. Right? I wanted to close with two things. One is, besides all business and besides the impact of what you do, etc. One thing I've seen about OML is that there is in most of the things that you do, there is always a thread of, or rather a streak of larger good, right? It's not political in nature. It's more social in nature. And whenever I speak to people who work with you, who are part of your core, and I see that in those people as well, right? How do you sort of go around creating that sort of a culture, right? Especially at times like this.
Wow, those are a very, I don't know what to say, but the words, I feel like you're giving us a lot of credit. So thank you. But I think it comes from this space that it's an ecosystem play. It is not a single company, single artist, single brand or single platform sort of play. I think, and the arts necessarily has to work like this. The only way the perceived value of something sort of goes up is if everybody perceives it to be the same way, right? Yeah. And I think it really comes from that we know that the only way the ecosystem will survive is if everyone in the ecosystem does well. So yeah, I think that's where that really comes from.
Yeah, and that's going to be really, really important, even from branded communication going forward.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've had some. So I know when we were talking about the pandemic earlier, we've seen the lockdown being enforced in a very uneven sort of way, where at least our global brand solutions business that now operates in about 22 countries, we've seen certain countries be okay with shoots. We've seen certain countries be okay with closed door studio productions or, with smaller gatherings. But it all comes from what their base realities were. So like, for example, in Eastern Europe, barring Russia, the other countries are doing okay. And they have enough medical infrastructure to support their population as well, right? Their approach to the lockdown and their approach to businesses carrying on at this point of time is very different from the way we've been enforced into one of the strictest lockdowns, but still been unsuccessful. And our numbers are, of course, only sort of growing. So I think a lot of what you do in the culture space will always be reactionary to both what the overall ecosystem, not ecosystem, but landscape is like, what people are thinking. And I think the point that you made about mortality being in the top 10 things that people speak about and are on top of mind is going to be a big part of how culture responds to that. As well as then the other thing is just how the governments are dealing with it, because it's necessarily operating in that framework, right?
Right.
And so we're seeing very differently themed content come out of Poland and Kenya, for example, that were okay with shoots, but countries like Morocco or then Lebanon, where obviously the economy has its own challenges. And we're working with creators in all these markets, and they're all responding to these very differently.
Great. Wonderful. Hey, we usually end the episode by asking our guest, what he or she is watching, reading, listening to. Tell us what's taking your mind space.
Okay, so I am reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a book that talks about the evolution of the mental health practice. So at OML, we actually started a program for all our teams to be able to access mental health care. So a few years ago, we actually made it part of our health insurance. And just with all the pressures that we're going through because of the lockdown, etc., all the anxiety around us, we've actually signed up for a program that gives everyone access to counselors on phone or app or any kind of distance counseling that they'd like. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more about, why, how, where, how does this even work? And honestly, I'm somebody who's always thought that words like mindfulness are just hocus pocus, they don't mean anything at all.
Yeah.
So just because I was coming from that space, I wanted to just understand how this works. And the book has actually done a great job of highlighting how the practice has evolved. So just from the fact that it went from being in the basements of American hospitals to today occupying the top floor, which also is almost a metaphor for how much money it's making drug companies there. So then, of course, why is it that, babies as young as 5 months old are on drugs nowadays for behavioral therapy, to obviously what we're seeing now with, cognitive behavioral therapy, etc. But at just like the underlying thread in the whole book is the fact that your mind, your body, and your brain are always working in tandem with each other. And there is a way to attend to our inner thoughts in a way that can make us more productive, more constructive, more ourselves, who we really want to be. And I really thought that book was...
It's fantastic. I loved, I've not heard about it, but I love the title, The Body Keeps.
Yes, The Body Keeps the Score. And that's actually what made me pick it up, because I genuinely believe it to be true. We have that, we have that reptilian brain and that mammalian brain. And those layers absolutely now make sense.
No, really. What are you listening to or watching?
Absolute trash, actually. I actually saw this show called, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this on air, so I might come back.
Please don't tell me it's Indian matchmaking.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. My husband and I started seeing that yesterday because, so he's been doing this thing since the lockdown started called Ask That Finance Guy on the internet. He started this Instagram handle called Ask That Finance Guy, and now he's helping people in their 20s and 30s talk about finance, go back to their parents, learn about trading, building a COVID emergency fund and all of these things. And just the conversations at home have gotten so serious and so pedantic that we decided to break that by watching Indian matchmaking. And we saw about 2 hours of that last night. And this morning woke up to say, can we watch the remains of that last episode? Did not think that would happen, but yeah.
Right. I know. I started. I haven't gotten that far yet. But, there's been eventful. So let me leave it at that.
I think it's a very validating experience because so far we have only seen that genre of content being made in the US or with those that we don't necessarily identify with.
Yeah.
So whether it's Keeping Up with the Kardashians or shows like that. But now that we see someone sort of flip the lens and say, hey, you guys also have your own levels of shallowness. And let us put that out for the rest of the world to see. It's sort of cringe and validating at the same time. And I think that's why it is such a sticky watching. You want to see the rest of it.
Yeah, thanks. Now, I was wondering why was this made. Now I know that there is a larger equalizing purpose that this solves. So.
Yes.
So now I feel better about watching. Gunjan, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise. Thank you for having me on this show.
Cheers. Have a great week ahead. So that was our show. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Beta, did you know 79% of all scientists in NASA are Indian only?
देखो, इंडिया में टैक्स सिर्फ मिडिल क्लास भरती है. Everyone is just enjoying free यार.
आजकल के youngsters are only interested in partying and enjoying. उनको देश की पड़ी ही नहीं है.
बेटा तुम बस शादी कर लो, उसके बाद तो you can enjoy life like anything.
I will tell you what this country needs. This country needs 15 years of dictatorship. That is the only way to become a superpower. See the Chinese, how much they've progressed.
सुनो, तुमने ये WhatsApp forward देखा?
So what's common between all of these statements?
They're all absolutely rubbish.
Fake WhatsApp forwards that spread like wildfire.
And statements that defy any logic.
We are here to debunk them all.
We're your family WhatsApp group's worst nightmare. We're what happens when you read a book.
Basically, we're just a bunch of guys who want to cut through the bullshit of everyone saying this, how it won't be true.
So that the next time someone confidently squeezes out some WhatsApp or Twitter BS, you can look them dead in the eye and go, Uncle, please sit.
So join me, Joel.
And me, Tushar.
Every Mondays for a fresh new episode of Uncle, Please Sit.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story-sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives, and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Story Sellers for personal stories, analysis, and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.